Hey guys, welcome back to another video. This is Troy with Cichlid Bros. In today's video, we are talking about freshwater angelfish because my 90-gallon tank, I had a couple breed, they laid eggs, and we're going to show about 42 days worth of footage and evolution of the eggs to fry to small babies, and talk about some tips and tricks of how you could potentially breed your own freshwater angelfish. I'll also point out a few things I could have done better throughout this process to be a little more successful, but regardless, it was a really fun process and I'm excited to have these guys, so let's check them out. So really quick before we show the start of this process, freshwater angelfish are South American cichlids that are usually very easy to breed. You just need a pair to form and eventually they'll probably lay eggs. You could buy a formed pair, which would be more expensive, or you could get a group of 4 to 7 of them and let those pairs form naturally. They've been known to breed in a variety of water parameters, so just making sure you have a cycled tank and you keep those nitrates below 40 parts per million, and they should breed sooner than later. The most difficult part of this process is making sure you remove the eggs or the fry at the right time to make sure any tank mates don't get to them first. This is my 90-gallon aquarium that isn't looking the best at the moment with some algae growth, but the water parameters are solid. As you can see, the angelfish laid eggs for the 3rd time that I've seen in this tank. Each time has been on the filter intake here, which makes it pretty difficult to remove the eggs. Some people will use a piece of slate or even a breeding cone so that they could easily remove it from the tank anytime the eggs are laid. Usually it's going to be on an upward or vertical surface. Since mine were on the filter intake here, I decided to just monitor it over the next day or so, and sure enough, the newly hatched fry were moved. Alright, so the eggs have hatched, and you can kind of see them wiggling around there. Really small, and they're on this thin piece of driftwood being protected by the angelfish, of course, and they've kind of started clearing off the algae there. And I know if I just let this be, these guys will not make it. They will be picked off by the other fish in the tank. So the only way to make sure they grow up is to remove them from the tank. So I think the plan is to try and cut off that top piece of the driftwood and move it into a separate tank. And here is that tank. I have a spare 10-gallon that I'm going to set up. I'm going to fill it up, put a couple pieces of decor in there as well just to have something in the tank. And then I'm going to take from this 20-gallon tank this Cichlid Shark Pro Nano that's been running on this tank, so it's definitely seeded. And this tank can run on the Tidal 35 easily. So we have a seeded filter that we're going to put in this tank, and then we have a heater and then just a light. So pretty simple setup, but hopefully we can get those angelfish babies in here and then they can grow up and we can see that full process. So the 10-gallon tank is now ready. I just put in a seeded filter, like I said, a piece of driftwood, some rocks, and some floating plants. I'm going to put on a lid once I put the baby angels in here, but let's go get them now. That whole piece of driftwood would be pretty difficult to get out of the tank, so I'm actually just going to cut off the top piece and hopefully all the babies stay there. I'll also get a net to hopefully scoop out any that fall off of the driftwood. All right. Okay, so we have the babies in the 10-gallon tank. A lot of them came on this piece of driftwood that we cut off, but then once I did that, there was also another 20 or so babies that I tried to catch with the net, and I think I got most of them. And basically every single baby that I got is giving them a chance to actually grow up and live, because they would not survive in that tank. The other angel, the other tetras would definitely eat the babies as they became free swimming. So you can see just a few little specks, but there is probably, I don't know how many, maybe 20 to 40, a good amount. There's one right there. You can just see a couple specks. So this is probably 1 day, maybe 2 days after I saw the eggs turn into wigglers and fry. So they're really, really small, but we will come back hopefully whenever these guys are a little bigger and we can see kind of their evolution. A few days later, they were tiny little specks in the new tank, and they don't really show that angelfish shape for a few weeks. There was a decent sized group hanging out in the tank there, especially in the top at the back. The first day or two as wrigglers, they'll feed on their yolk sacs, so just try not to throw too much food in there the first day or so that they hatch. But once they seem to be free swimming, that's when you can start feeding them pretty regularly. And about a week later, you can see the group has grown slightly, but they are still tiny. Probably the most common question at this stage is what to feed these guys. The best food is probably live baby brine if you have it. I didn't, so I just crushed up flake food, spirulina, and krill flake as finely as possible and tried to drop it in as close to the fry as possible. I fed them about 2 to 3 times per day at this stage, and around day 17 and about 2 weeks since they hatched, they are slowly putting on some more size and swimming around much more freely. I may have lost a few of the babies in the transfer to the new tank, but after those first few weeks they seem way more durable, can find food easier, and seem to have a much higher survival rate at this point. So this is day 19 since they've been in this 10-gallon tank, so they're about 3 weeks old, and you can finally start to see some shape coming in from these guys. I would say the last few days was when they really seemed to hit a growth spurt, and they weren't really a speck, and you can kind of see the angelfish start to form. And I've tried to count the babies. I would say maybe 12 or 13 at one time is the highest I've gotten to, but there could be more behind the rocks and behind the driftwood. I think I scooped out maybe 20 to 30 initially, so maybe about 12 or 13, 14 maybe have made it so far, but we will see as they grow, and more of these maybe will start poking out of the rocks. But these guys are doing good, and I'm excited to have a group of babies. A couple weeks later, and day 36, since I saw the eggs in the tank, and you can really start to see the angelfish shape form, and even some of the color patterns start to come in. I'm not really sure what coloration these guys will end up having, since the parents were a marble and a gold Pterophyllum scalaire. I do plan on keeping all of these guys as they grow though, so not too worried about the specifics there. I just hope they look cool. It's also important to note that pulling the eggs or the fry out of the main tank is usually advisable for a few reasons. First is that the tank mates will likely get them quickly, but even if it were just the parents in that tank, many times the angelfish will eat their own eggs or the fry. It sometimes takes multiple tries for the parents to stop doing this, and some will get it right away and some may not for a very long time. So your best bet is to pull them out into a separate grow out tank. When breeding, the parents will definitely be more aggressive guarding those eggs or the fry in the tank, so definitely keep that in mind. You may need to separate the pair if the aggression is too much, or if you don't want them to breed anymore, you may just need to separate them. Lastly, when you see the eggs, if any turn white, those are infertile and will likely fungus over. The parents usually fan the eggs and try to remove the white ones to prevent the rest of the batch from being overcame. If you remove the eggs before they hatch, you can also get chemicals like methylene blue to help prevent this fungus from spreading. So I have somewhere between 12 and 15 that have made it to this point, and if I had better timing pulling out the wrigglers, and if my grow out tank had been set up beforehand and much more established, I may have had better success. I also think I could have had a sponge filter for some slower flow and better oxygenation, and maybe even live baby brine shrimp. Also to note, if you want faster growth than what you're seeing in my angels here, I just increase your feedings to maybe 3 or 4 times per day and increase your water changes. If you're feeding more and keeping up with the water changes and maintenance, you could get them to a sellable size probably by 4 months, maybe even less. And if you have this process down, you could yield hundreds of them rather than just the 12 to 15 I have here. On day 42, and these guys are starting to look good. Some are growing faster than others, but they're overall looking great. Another thing to note during the breeding process is to have a relatively low flow for the fry, and to make sure you have intake sponges on your filters, or you could go with a sponge filter itself. I have a heater at the tank set at 77 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's a solid temperature to induce breeding as well. I didn't do anything else special to get these guys to breed. Like I said, it is very simple with angels. Just have that pair form when they are mature enough to breed, and it'll likely happen, and happen often. Some people will say you should feed some good frozen foods to fatten them up, but I don't really think that's totally necessary. Angels can lay eggs every few weeks, so don't worry if you don't get it right your first try. You'll likely have many other attempts. I'm not too worried about my smaller yield here, as I could definitely raise more babies in the future. I'm just enjoying the process though, and I'm okay with the current growth, as these guys will eventually go back into that 90-gallon aquarium with their parents for a large angelfish community. I'm not too worried about selling what I breed at the moment, but hopefully this info helped you if that's your goal. So I'm very excited to have this small group of angelfish growing up and eventually going into one of my bigger aquariums here. But if you have had success breeding angelfish and you have any tips or tricks, definitely leave those down in the comment section below. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks again for watching.